everyone, and welcome to our panel, our second panel of 2023. My name is Colleen Carroll, and I'm a content publishing coordinator at Nexus Marketing and your moderator for today's session. Our topic today is our semi-virtual world nonprofit hybrid work best practices. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with this amazing group of experts. As usual, before I introduce our panelists and we jump into this fascinating topic, I do have a few quick logistics to cover. NXUnite is made in partnership with Nexus Marketing, and the NXUnite mission is to make introductions that lead to lasting relationships and serve as a hub for connection in the mission-driven sector. As you saw in our video, on NXUnite, you can find upcoming industry events, suggested influencers to follow, trusted solutions, cause-driven podcasts, and of course, panels with experts such as these lovely folks here with me today. Today's hour-long panel will include time both for questions curated by my team and questions from you all, our audience. So at any point during the panel, if you have any questions that you would like our panelists to address, please drop them either in the questions tab or directly in the chat, and we'll use the second half of the panel to address those questions. So again, at any time, submit them. We will discuss them in the second half of the panel. If at any point you are having any technical difficulties, let us know in the chat. My team member Malou is under the username Team NXUnite, and she will do her best to assist. So reach out in the chat and she'll direct message you to help try to problem solve. I did also just want to quickly share that this panel is being recorded. So if you get to the end of the session and the insight you heard was just so fantastic that you're ready to hear it a second time right away, that's wonderful news. It'll automatically be in your email inbox after the session. Give it 5 to 10 minutes and it should be there. It will also be accessible on the NXUnite website in the on-demand panel section. So if you have any friends in the industry who you're like, can't believe they missed it, they needed to be at that panel, share that same registration page, landing page that you used, and they'll be able to access the recording. Finally, before I introduce our panelists, I do want to thank all of you for attending the panel, whether you were joining us live right now, watching an hour from now, a week from now, a month from now, a few months from now. Thank you for taking time out of your day. I hope you enjoyed the session. I'm really always amazed by the mission-driven community, the nonprofits that attend these panels. I get to read through all the different organizations represented. So you all are doing fantastic work, and we are supporting for you and rooting for you in 2023. All right, to begin with the introductions, I'd first like to introduce Allison Fuller, who is the managing partner and co-founder at Envision Consulting. She has worked in the nonprofit world for 10 years and brings a wealth of experiences and knowledge to the nonprofit arena. As a former escrow officer, Allison brings her extensive planning and logistical experience into overseeing many aspects of management, organization, contract administration, strategic planning, and operations. So glad you could join us, Allison.
Thanks for having me.
Also here with us today is Erin Linkins, who is the Director of HR at Kanopi Studios. She is a senior HR professional with more than 20 years of experience working in human resources for creative and tech-focused companies. So her role as Kanopi's Director of Human Resources makes her feel right at home. Erin spends her workdays focused on listening, solving problems, and untangling knots for Kanopi's growing, fully distributed team. She spends her personal time as a respected nightclub DJ in Washington, D.C., creating art and doing the bidding of her cats, Betty and Snoop. So glad you could be here, Erin.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here.
And finally, we have Jill Krumholz, who is the co-owner and managing partner at Real HR Solutions. Throughout her career, she has had the ability to build strong relationships, identify client needs, and help companies find solutions. As a search professional, she used these strengths to source and identify talent. Her prior HR experience includes retail and healthcare industry HR and operations. So glad you could be here, Jill.
Thank you so much, Colleen. It's so nice to be here again. I appreciate it. And I'm sorry because I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty. So I am on video, but you can't see me. So thank you all for attending.
Well, we are so glad that we can hear you so we can hear your amazing insight. And hopefully for future panels, we'll get the video situation shortened. All right, we are going to jump right in. And Erin, I'm going to have you start us off with this first question. How is the world of hybrid work different today than it was a year ago or even pre-pandemic?
That is such a great question. Thank you so much for asking me. So I've worked in partnership with agencies primarily who have been hybrid workforces, fully remote or fully brick and mortar. So the current company that I work with, Kanopi, has been fully remote for more than 10 years. So we were prepared for what's happened in the world in terms of the hybrid workspace. But I would say that the world of hybrid work is, for one, more acceptable in the eyes of company leadership. I think more candidates that you're looking for out in the candidate pool have the experience because of the pandemic. Employers are willing to have part or all of their workforce functioning remotely, sometimes not with any kind of brick and mortar office. And also some employees realize they're either very cut out for remote work or not at all. So I think just kind of coming to some realizations about the reality of the hybrid workforce, what it takes to work from home, who wants to do that and who doesn't, is really becoming a lot clearer the longer we're doing it as an accepted part of the workforce today.
Definitely appreciate you starting this off. Allison, I'm going to turn this same question to you. I'd love to hear your insight on it as well. How is the world of hybrid work different?
It's so interesting to start off with such a different perspective. So the majority of the clients that we work with, I'm a reformed executive director of a homeless shelter, and we work directly with most of our organizations are social service organizations working directly in a place-based setting. And that's been really difficult as we move to a hybrid setting. We talk about things like providing direct service, providing oversight and care. Some of these things just cannot be done remotely. And so I think, the word that I would say that is substantially different now versus 2 years ago or even 3 years ago is that hybrid work is now intentional, not circumstantial, not something that is a one-off or an exception. It's something that's becoming an intentional part of culture. And as we pivot to it, thinking about being intentional, we really start to think about how does this drive recruitment? How does this drive retention? But then on a broader scale, how does this impact equity? So we start to think about the equity of who can work from home and who can't, what hybrid looks like, how expectations are set. So I think that there's been a huge pivot to, at least in organizations that are traditionally place-based and center-based, intentional and culture changing.
Definitely appreciate that perspective. All right, Jill, want to make sure we hear your thoughts on this as well. How do you see the world of hybrid work as being different than a few years ago?
Sure. So to really play on what Allison said, and just so you know, we are a national firm, do probably 75% with nonprofits and a lot of place-based organizations. And the challenges now in terms of very intentional hybrid situations and remote situations are so specific to an organization and really to the employee base and what employees are doing. So there is a lot of frustration, I think, in those populations because certain people, certainly in the more centralized or corporate kind of positions, can very easily work remotely, where there are customer-facing employees that can't. And so I think that this is offering challenges that are just so enormous as it relates to recruitment and retention. And what we're seeing is that our clients are really very much hurting from one, either people deciding that they no longer want to do what they're doing, and that they're going to other kinds of organizations or trying to get into other positions. So I think this, it's a really very interesting time from an HR perspective as an HR consultant. It's a fascinating time. It's really very challenging, but I think very, very difficult for organizations. So I'm really pleased to be part of this. And I see that actually people are here from all over the country. So I think that different areas have different challenges as they move forward. So I'm really looking forward to getting further into this conversation.
I am as well. I think it's a really important topic, and I just think that first set of answers from you all shows why it's important that we're here today. For those of you who are watching live, our audience, if you want to contribute, we've just put out a poll where you can let us know how your team is currently working, whether you're fully remote or hybrid, just in case you want to share kind of what your circumstances are. All right, we are going to keep on moving. And Allison, I'm going to have you start us off with this next question. How can nonprofits maintain and grow their work culture as they function as a hybrid team?
If only I had 3 hours or 3 days to answer that because it's such a huge question. But I think the answer is kind of the same. Really, really intentionally. A lot of the dissatisfaction that we see, or a lot of the disconnect that happens, is because hybrid work has arisen out of the circumstance, out of what's happening right now, and as it's becoming more and more part of the culture, as uncomfortable as some of these conversations are, who can work from the office, when can they work from the office, what does the time schedule look like, what are the expectations, it's not having these things in writing and set up front that then leads to problems down the road. You want to have a clear set of expectations for everybody that's working hybrid, and a clear set of expectations, things like everything from what are your home office setup expectations? What are your communication setup looks like? What does our monitoring look like? Are we monitoring your work from a different place? All of those things, set it up now. I know that we've been doing this for a while, but if we're really pivoting to this intentional way to look at it, setting it up now around what that looks like. And also, I think a lot of people do well. I'm not one of those people, by the way, that does well remotely. I really thrive in a team environment. We have a full office here in very soaked Pasadena. But for us, that team element is so important. So I know people hate meetings. I know the push comes away from, why isn't this just an email? But to really take the opportunity to build your team outside of those meetings, find ways for people to interact so they don't feel like they're alone. But those are my two big things. One is really set expectations, and two, find those times for connection.
Wonderful. All right, Jill, I'm going to move this question over to you. How can our nonprofits maintain and grow their work culture if they're functioning as a hybrid team?
Sure. So I think it is about setting expectations and managing expectations, and also acknowledging as an organization that things are fluid, and that what it looks like today may not be what it looks like 6 months ago for various reasons. And the onus is really it's about communication. The onus is really on the organization to be able to communicate the whys, right? And what is happening and why certain people are, and be very clear about it and very purposeful in explaining why certain people's roles are on site and why others can be more flexible. I think the other thing that's so critical is technology as we move forward, because technology, while organizations may not have the funds for technology, I think that it's so critical, certainly in a remote environment, and certainly when you're talking about retention. The technology piece is going to be a huge piece in terms of, one, bringing people in, onboarding them, making them feel comfortable, making them feel part of the community, and having a means for communication.
Great. All right, Erin, would love to hear your thoughts on this, as well as kind of maintaining a culture in a hybrid or fully virtual environment.
Sure, no problem. I've been working fully virtually for 7 years now, maybe 8, and I love it. So I'm on kind of the opposite end of the spectrum from Allison, but I think I completely agree with what both Allison and Jill had to say about, just ensuring that things are accessible, ensuring that sort of the rules of engagement, if you will, are clearly established. As far as developing culture, what I've found in fully remote workspaces or even hybrid workspaces, if you only have a small number of folks working remotely, making sure that they don't feel like outsiders in the team, making sure that they have the ability to call into meetings, hear what's going on, that there are digital spaces where, and as a great example, Kanopi has a very robust Slack presence. So we have channels that celebrate our pets. We have, vacation photo channel. We have a family channel. We allow employees to have fun in that digital community space, in addition to getting work done there. And what that does is it really breeds community. in a way that makes everybody feel like they're on a level playing field. But I think one of the big things as well, when you're interviewing people coming into either a hybrid or a fully remote situation, making sure that the ways that you're interviewing, that the ways that you are testing are accessible. Not everyone has access to a computer. Not everyone has access to digital platforms. So ensuring that you're really thinking about, in a critical way, what you have to provide for candidates as they come into your pipeline and you're moving them through the interview process. And then as you're onboarding, making sure that you have considerations for your remote workers as well as your on-site. You might not have an IT person readily available in their time zone. So just ensuring that you're thinking about holistically what the impact of having a remote worker might be in terms of everything from interviewing them, onboarding them, making sure that they have the technology and the setup that they need. And also if there are the kinds of benefits that, for example, let's say your office buys lunch for all of your on-site folks, that you're providing some sort of equivalent benefit so people don't feel othered in terms of being on the outside of that situation. So those are my suggestions.
Wonderful suggestions. I really appreciate that because I do think many of us, the move to hybrid or remote was a reactive thing. We reacted to a situation, and it's been easy to kind of just keep functioning in the way that we did it in those initial 2 weeks, months that we were figuring it out. But there's a lot more to consider as we're doing it as a long-term strategy. So again, I'm just so happy that we are here talking about this. Jill, I'm going to have you start us off with this next question. We all know nonprofit professionals are busy. It comes up in almost every single one of the panels I'm moderating that there's never enough time, there's not enough resources. So with that in mind, what small change to their hybrid practices or virtual practices could nonprofits make that could potentially have a really big impact on the nonprofit as a whole?
That is a tough question. And I guess the operative word is small, right? Because this feels rather large. I will go back. I just want to go back. I will respond to your question, Colleen. I want to go back to something which is around some organizations are still figuring it out. And it's okay for employers to say to a potential employee, this is where we are at the moment, and we are still figuring it out. And I think the recruiting and the onboarding process should be pretty transparent in terms of where an organization is, because you're talking about really during that interview time, really working with that potential employee and making sure that that's the right fit, that this is the right culture, that their expectation is aligned with what you can provide. So just wanted to respond to that because I think it is very important. I think in terms of some of the more simple ways, I think the technology piece is costly and there has to be a huge commitment. Some things that are probably a little bit more simple is some ongoing communication, and whether it's town halls, whether it's more department meetings without over scheduling meetings. It really starts with communication. And I may be going ahead a little bit, but things like having job descriptions and setting expectations for new employees or existing employees is so critical. And as an HR professional, I would say that so much of what the whole employee cycle is about is really founded on expectations and communicating those and managing those expectations. So I think job descriptions, while they take time and can be cumbersome, is certainly important. And I think a performance review really strategy is also very important. And again, all of these things take time. So I don't think it's quick wins, but I think it's a process by which an organization and employees go through.
Wonderful. Erin, I'm going to turn this same question to you. Any advice on small tips, small changes that could have a really big impact for our nonprofits?
Sure. I mean, I think with, when you have a hybrid workspace or majority, remote workers, things like that, the folks that are remote miss out on the office banter. So if you have a project team working on a project and they say, oh, let's do this, that, and the third, having some sort of centralized system, whether it's a Jira system, project management system, a Trello board, whatever works best for your organization and your teams, just so that all of those notes can be captured somewhere centrally. That's one of the biggest things I think with, in my experience, a hybrid workspace, the remote workers feel like they miss out on some of those conversations that are just sort of water cooler in office conversations. So that's one thing. I think also, I remember anecdotally working with a team where they switched to a hybrid model and some of the remote employees would just disappear for a good bit of time. So I think setting expectations, and this kind of falls in line with what Jill was talking about with job descriptions. So maybe if you're talking about what are the necessary sort of criteria for performing the job, maybe it's, you know, the ability to communicate in a certain way about availability, or having the availability to be reachable by phone or digitally or something like this. But, you know, just ensuring that the folks who are remote are understand rules of engagement for checking out, checking back in, hours of work. This can be especially important if you're working on varied time zones. So if you have remote workers who are in another time zone, just ensuring that you all understand what the hours of work are and how you check in and out with each other so that you know when folks are online. Giving the folks that work from home the space to be at home. So allowing those folks to be offline and not reachable when they're not at work. This is a big one, just to respect people's need to unplug, because I think we can all think of one example at least of a person who works from home and would work around the clock if they could. And you really have to say, like, hey, time to stop working. I know that your office is your bedroom, but you got to like step away now. And then I think, you know, just ensuring that the team understands who is working remotely on their team, who they need to loop in on certain decisions, just ensuring that there still is that sense of community as well. I think those are, with the exception of the expense of maybe a project management system, those are all relatively quick win ways that you can just kind of set some parameters and keep a steady flow through the day.
Fantastic. Allison, anything you'd want to add on this conversation of small changes that could have a big impact for nonprofits?
I've been thinking about small, but I, you know, I actually have three. One big that if we were all, you know, around a table, I would see half of you go, absolutely not, never. So I'm just going to premise it that way. Huge. Because a few years ago, so this is our 12th year in business. We have 14 individuals, and we only work with nonprofits, and we're on different coasts. And a few years ago, we talked about scaling. At any given time, we're running, you know, 20 or 30 searches. How do we scale this? We went and actually saw a project manager. So I'm going to give you the advice that we got for free, that we paid for, that again, you're not going to love. And that is, we do a daily stand-up. So every single day at 9 in the morning, we all do a stand-up. Everybody talks about what they're going to do for the day. It is frustrating and enlightening. I see everybody every single day. We know what we're going to do. You're going to say, I don't have time for that. Yes, you do. You should. Number two, that is medium. My medium tip is keep and set recurring meetings. Don't say we're going to do this huddled or this backup or this team meeting. What's your availability? No, it's on this third Thursday of every month. And if you can make it, you can make it. And if you can't, you can't. And that'll keep that rhythm going so that you're not completely disrupting your rhythm. If somebody's out of town, they know they can catch up next time. So that is the medium. And then the small thing is at the end of every of our stand-ups internally, every day somebody has to come up with like a joke or a funny story or something. To just lighten it up. We all just ran through what we're going to do for the day. It's a little overwhelming. So I have a joke. You know, that is how we kind of keep connected, and everybody is still kind of talking. Once we log off, people are still on that Slack channel, coming up with different, you know, jokes or stories. So I think that that's one way that is small that can be surprisingly helpful. We've done that now for 3 years, and my husband is now joke king. So I think it's been a really good small practice.
Wonderful. I love that idea. I know you say everyone's going to hate it, but we do daily stand-up. So I'm just feeling validated now because I also love them. And if I didn't have it in my day, I feel like my day wouldn't start because that's kind of what I jump into. All
Can I
right.
add something to that? And I think this is all part of it, which is that organizations, and I want to go back to what Allison said about scheduling. Having a schedule is really important. Acknowledging that maybe everyone can't be there, hopefully with some accommodation, but also expectations is really important. But I think that when we talk about, for instance, team meetings or department meetings or even organization-wide meetings, especially with smaller organizations, the idea that it's not pushing information, but rather that they're shared information. So as an employee, I understand what marketing department is doing. I understand what the programmatic, departments are doing. And so that people are sharing information pretty constantly. So one, you understand your role in relation to other people, and you understand the direction the organization is going. So I think that is critical in terms of sharing info and helping for people to feel engaged and understand the organization and where it's going.
Definitely. I appreciate that addition. Thanks, Jill. Erin, I'm going to have you start us off with this next question. Do you have any best practices or tips for nonprofits that are wanting to kind of evaluate their current hybrid or virtual practices? Kind of what should they be looking for and kind of keeping an eye out for?
Sure. I think it depends if you are staying geographically local to your brick and mortar office or deciding to geographically spread out. I would say having a strong HR person, either a consultant or an on-site person, depending on what's accessible to you, or a good employment lawyer to help you manage the varied policies that might need to be modified for different states. As an example, California and New York can have strongly different laws than other states can. So just being aware of, if you're hiring folks for the first time in a different state, what are the varied laws you need to be available or what you need to have accessible to you so you don't make any mistakes in changing policies or hiring terminations, that sort of thing. I think additionally, surveying your workforce just to see what they need. If they, have employee happiness, if they feel like anything needs to be enhanced in order to, sort of make their experience a bit more accessible or enjoyable. That could be anything from a remote stipend to doing those more kind of balanced benefits for on-site versus off-site employees, things like that. And then I would say, just to kind of piggyback on the last question, setting up things like equally uncomfortable meetings. I know at Kanopi, we've got folks in all of the time zones in the US and Canada. So sometimes our meetings are early and those are painful for our West Coast folks. And sometimes they run late, which are painful for our East Coast folks. But we try to do that in balance. And we also do the same meeting, same time every week, which allows us to just have a comfortable cadence for everyone, no matter what or where they are.
Great. Passing this question over to you, Jill. Do you have any tips or tricks for nonprofits that are ready to evaluate their current practices?
Yes. To follow what Erin was saying, I think that kind of taking the pulse on what the organization is, how the people are feeling is critical. An HR presence that people can go to, EAP programs. Some people continue to be very lonely and they don't have a choice, right? And they're working out of a one-room apartment. And so it's really important for there to be support. Taking the pulse, doing employee surveys. I don't know that I had heard about it more than 2 years ago, but doing stay interviews, right? We used to talk about exit interviews, but stay interviews, what's working, what's not working, I think is very important. Shifting gears a little bit, I think that it's really important with remote folks that in addition to there being employee handbooks, that there need to be state supplements, but there needs to be kind of a common thread across the organization, regardless of where people are located. And it's really around culture. And it's about really communicating so that people feel very, very much involved and engaged, regardless of where they are. So there are the kind of the policies, practices on local levels, but there is hopefully kind of a common mission, vision, values that people can buy into and feel part of. I think that's really critical.
I completely agree. Allison, anything you want to add to this kind of conversation of evaluating our current practices?
I mean, I think that these have both all been great points, but just in a really kind of, if I had a bullet list, one, technology, everything from, are you using, Windows? Are you using Mac? We're a Mac house, but people have Windows at home. How does that work? Working on collaborative documents. What's the expectation for evaluating that and turning that in? What's your project management software? The number two piece of that is being really honest and frank about personalities. And so we're all hiring professionals. And the thing about hiring is that as much as we try to make it sure that we're very objective, there's a subjective piece to it. And that subjective piece that we sometimes leave out is that piece around personalities. Here at Envision, we use StrengthsFinder pretty extensively, not only as a team tool, but to find out how people best communicate. It has been so transformative during this hybrid time, because I really understand better how people communicate, how we fit together. And so understanding, one, from a technology basis, and two, from a personality basis, how is your team really getting along? And then the third piece of it is really having a frank conversation around what the situation would have to be in order for things to change. So if we're going to say this is what it is right now, let's lay out what that actually looks like, so that if there does have to be a change, then be very upfront. We're going to have this evaluative process. We're going to try to strengthen our hybrid practices. This is what we're looking at, and this is why it is that way. Either we don't have a in-place office, or we do have direct services, or we don't. And this would have to be what would have to change to move one way or the other. If we were to make a change, how would that impact you? So being as far out in front of these evaluation practices as possible, I think, is really helpful.
What comes to mind as I think about this is that as you as nonprofits are listening and reflecting in terms of your organizations, I hear nonprofits, and again, a lot of programmatic organizations that are so focused on recruitment and retention that is such a huge problem that it's hard to kind of get past that, right? And I think that the things that we're all talking about today are things that are related to building culture, building comfort, building engagement. And while salaries can't be where you'd like them to be for your employees, there are so many intangibles that are so critical in the nonprofit world. One of the things, and for any of you who've heard me speak before, I always talk about really marketing your organization in a very, very purposeful way. And what is it about your organization that's going to attract and retain people? And it's just so critical in this marketplace. And for nonprofits, it becomes even more critical. And again, it's a tough challenge.
Yeah. None of these are easy answers. We all are kind of keeping on, figuring it out as we go. Awesome. I do just want to remind our live audience, if you have any questions or comments that you want to make, if you have anything you want our panelists to discuss, this would be a great time to submit them either through the chat or through the questions tab. Otherwise, I will keep asking my questions, but I want to make sure we are addressing the topics that are of most interest to you. While we wait to see if questions are going to be submitted in, Erin, I'm going to have you start us off with this next question. I kind of want to look towards the future of hybrid and virtual work. What do you see as the future of this world, and how can we prepare today to kind of get ahead?
I mean, I think it's going to become more common. And I also think that as people have been forced to do this over the last 3 years, some are realizing that it's their preference and may request that they have that built into their contract in some way. So, I mean, even if it's not something that organization may intend to do for the long term. It may be requested by a candidate. So just considering, is that something they'd be open to? What would be the impact? So I think that kind of thing, and just being prepared to evaluate and update policies to cover both avenues of work is really important. Understanding differences, as I mentioned before, in employment law nationwide, just, you know, talking to a professional who has experience with hybrid workforces or fully remote workforces, just to ensure that you're covering all the bases so that you can think about, having a scenario that covers all of the folks that are working for you, no matter where they are. And then lastly, salary banding. I think, when I think about remote workforces, I think about pay equity a lot, because I think in some cases organizations might say, oh, good, now we can hire from places where the cost of living is much lower, therefore salaries are much lower. Our experience has been that just generally salary banding to address a national average and a geographic differential for more expensive geographic locations has been instrumental to pay equity. We really believe in pay equity for all of our employees, no matter where they live or where they choose to live. So I think just coming up with some standard practices around that is really critical as well.
Absolutely. Allison, I'm going to pass this question to you. Any suggestions for how we can prepare today for the future?
There are two things that are really on the forefront. One, Erin just really illustrated well, is starting January 1st, California joined many of the other states in requiring wage transparency. And I think that there is a piece there around what hybrid means in relation to compensation. Are there things like home office setups, Wi-Fi stipends, cell phone stipends? All of those things have to be considered. And so as we work on wage transparency, it's not just wage transparency, it's all of the things that come with working hybrid that I think we have to be really cognizant of. This is absolutely reshaping the way we think about wages here in California. And, we've also worked for a few years in Colorado as well, so have had that experience, but it does reshape how we think about compensation. So hybrid is going to keep shaping that. And I think the other piece is that nothing is set in stone. So yesterday, I'm sure that maybe it was the day before, you saw Bob Iger asking all Disney employees to come back 4 days a week. 2 months before that, it was Twitter. A month prior to that, it was JPL NASA, where my husband works, to, just all of a sudden after years of maybe a hybrid situation. So I think that organizations are going to have to be very clear about, this is part of our culture. This is how we work. And that's the expectation. Otherwise, when these big changes occur, you're going to see attrition when we already have problems with retention, when we already have problems with recruitment. If you are not clear that hybrid is part of your culture or remote is part of your culture, set it in stone. Because if not, you'll see these big changes. Somebody hires a new CEO, and guess what? We're all back in the office. And I think that could be really catastrophic towards cultures and retention.
I think that's a really important topic. There's just a lot there, and I feel like every day you see a new business that is saying we're all back in person, and you see some pushback from the employees. Jill, this question over to you. How can we prepare today for the future, and what do you see as the future?
So I think there's a huge onus on leaders, leaders to think differently and continue to think differently. And, I think that very often when we're in social situations, when we are, and talk to folks, we talk about, well, is this here to stay? Is this really, a passing fancy? And in reality, from HR perspective and working with clients, we see this as very much the state of play going forward. And so what does that mean? How do you do things that are again, very purposeful, so you're not shooting from the hip? And going back to what Allison said, having really transparency around why you're doing what you're doing, and the fact that things could change, at any point or at some point, but also being a confident leader to say, I have your back, I have this, we're planning, we're not looking to do things drastically, And if we do, for some reason, there is a reason. I think also the pay equity is so critical, and New York has had that for a while. And there are good and bad things. And as it relates to nonprofits, I think that there has not been huge transparency in organizations, and there's been a fear, and that's understandable because and the remote piece plays a part and makes this more complicated. But I think that what we're learning is that employees really value honesty to the extent that organizations, employers can be honest. And I think that the world of work is being reshaped, and it will continue to shape. And hopefully we will all get better at managing this, because I do think it is here to stay. So.
Appreciate that insight. I'm going to pull some questions from registration now. When people signed up, they submitted some, and we got some great ones. Allison, I'll have you start us off with this first one. The question is, can you share some pitfalls of hybrid work to look out for?
Sure. I think the biggest one is disengagement, and it's not everybody thrives in a remote workplace. So that making sure that you're really putting a focus on engagement, and I think, what company was it that decided that they were going to do away with all meetings? It was Salesforce maybe that decided they were going to do away with all meetings. And you've really got a problem with engagement then, because you're not really having that set time and place for people to engage. So making sure that if you have employees who are not ready or used to or like the hybrid workplace, and then pitfalls number 2, the kind of unequal expectations for different classes of workers, different geographies of workers, different. So there is always a little bit of that piece of why doesn't she have to come into the office and I have to come into the office, or why is their situation different than mine? So that is the biggest pitfall, and that's why you've heard, I think, both Erin and Jill really hammer on about expectations and making sure we're very, very clear, because it's not just for me. I also want to know why those people over there don't come in. And so I think that that's really critical to making sure that you head that off as much as you can. People are still people. So that would be my advice.
Definitely. Jill, anything you want to add to this kind of pitfalls of hybrid work that leaders should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I think there's a real component around people learning differently, people having different defaults in terms of what's comfortable for them, multi-generational environments. And again, people have different needs. And so I think the challenge is for organizations to be really conscious of that. And it's easier when people in front of you, right, to say, okay, there's a difference here. Whether it's an early career person versus a later career person. People are much more, they're able to be vocal in a way that they're not when it's remote. And so I think it really is very, very important to realize that your folks are different, and you don't want to hire people who are all the same, right? So if you're hiring people who are different, how do you accommodate that? Or how do you at least address it? And it actually interesting, Allison's talking about strength finders, right? It really is about meeting people where they are. And I think that with different organizations, we've used different tools, and different tools work differently, but there are such aha moments in terms of, this is the way I look at something, and someone else approaches it or looks at it differently. And I think as organizations, we need to keep that in mind.
Erin, anything you want to add into this conversation of pitfalls? Otherwise, I'll have you start us off with the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I can add some stuff. I feel like one of the things that we just sort of inherently realized, having done this for a long time fully remotely, is that someone mentioned it earlier, that folks get lonely. As the pandemic sort of developed over the last 3 years, even folks who are used to working from home may have had partners or kids at home as well. So I think adapting to a differing at-home environment can be a little bit challenging for folks. So I would encourage any organization that has a fully remote or a hybrid workforce to think about ways to bring folks together. For example, at Kanopi, we're not afraid to have fun. We also have a benefit where folks who live in the same geographic area get a stipend to get together and have dinner or go have a picnic or something like this, so that we can actually get together in person in some instances. We also have a every other year we meet up for a retreat as well, to the extent that we're able with COVID and, you know, financially and things of that nature. But I think just creating an environment where business gets done, but also we recognize people's need to connect, need to enjoy each other's company, get to know each other, that we're not all cogs in a machine, but that we're people doing work and that we all deserve to have that connection with each other. So I think thinking of ways to foster that in a way that's going to engage and excite folks is really important.
Wonderful. That leads perfectly into what my next question was, because the next question from registration was, how do you ensure employee satisfaction in a hybrid or virtual setup? And I feel like that's exactly kind of what you just shared. Anything you want to add to that on that topic?
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, employee satisfaction comes in a lot of different forms. So again, I'm going to just re-emphasize doing either an annual or with a regular cadence, doing a survey that covers a lot of different things, from engagement on projects to management engagement to collaboration as a company to benefits and things of that nature, just to kind of get a pulse check and see what people need and want, and see if, you know, the company itself is in a position to pivot toward any of those needs. But I think just ensuring that folks are seen as well. We have a Slack channel that's called Being Human, and it's the space that we've all agreed is where people go to not be okay. So through the pandemic, it was really helpful when people were like, my kids are here and they're driving me crazy, or, you know, my spouse has been stuck in wherever for X amount of time because they have COVID and I'm all alone and lonely. It gives people a chance to just be human beings, and we see their humanity and meet them where they are. So that's what I would suggest.
Wonderful. Allison, any tips or tricks for ensuring employee satisfaction in a hybrid setup?
Those are all amazing tips. But I think the same thing that applies in hybrid is the same thing that applies in real life, which is ultimately when recruiters do well, we find why people are not happy. And one of the biggest things that we hear over and over is recruiting is, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know if there's growth here, or I'm not happy with my current management or supervision setup. So don't get so focused on hybrid that those things are not being considered. Sometimes I think we're so busy making the pivot that we forget, hey, this person really wants to do this kind of work, or this kind of manager, we still, really is going to have to pivot their working style because it didn't work in person. And now, we're going to have to really make some adjustments for hybrid. So just keep your eyes high and make sure that you're really focusing on those two questions that are always going to worry employees. Where am I going? What does my growth pattern look like? And what does my management structure look like right now? Sorry to be kind of like stodgy about it, but I just think that that's ultimately what keeps people at your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate the honesty. I think it's an important reminder. Jill, any last additions you want to have in terms of employee satisfaction?
The cost of turnover is high. So going back to recruiting and hiring, it's really level setting so that people who are interviewing with you understand your organization and the culture and what they're getting into, right? The good and the bad, or the good and the frustrating. And you really want to hire for that. I think more and more we are looking at hiring less for requirements and more for competency, skills that are transferable. And I think that's an important piece as we bring people into organizations. Again, turnover is expensive. And if we can do some upfront work, and this goes back to even making sure you have technology in place. It's costly. It's costly to spend time with maybe assessments, hiring assessments. But I think there's a huge payoff in those kinds of things. And I think nonprofits should look at those things as well.
All right, we are almost at time, so I'm going to do one quick last speed round question so that we can hear from each of our panelists for a final time. We have obviously spent this past hour talking about hybrid work and virtual work. We could probably have spent 2 or 3 panels on this topic, even on some of the individual questions. So I'd love to hear from each of our panelists. What's one topic or conversation that you hope nonprofits will be considering in the next few months? Potentially something that you'd be like, oh, I hope we would do a panel on that at some point, or even just you hope that it'll be at the kind of the front of people's minds the next few months. Allison, can I have you start us off with this one?
Shoot, I was hoping to hear what they said first. Sure. One of the things that we focus on were primarily executive search, but 25% of our work is mergers and acquisitions. There's a lot of opportunity for partnership and collaboration, especially with being competitive about workforce. So mergers and acquisitions among nonprofits.
Wonderful. Sorry for putting you on the spot there. Oh. Jill, over to you.
I think that the focus and I think increased focus is how do you look at total comp? How do you look at strategies and how do you communicate those things, right? So stepping back and looking at what your organization offers and how do you sell that to employees? And again, I think that marketing your organization is really critical, and we kind of take for granted that people can do that. So I'd love to talk more about that because I think it is critical, and I think it plays through as you continue to have employees and try to retain them, and really paying attention to what people need and want and how you develop them and looking at individuals. So I think there's so much to talk about in each of these areas. And I think that we all feel passionate, very, very passionate about these things, and probably could talk about them for hours, to your point, Colleen.
Definitely. All right, Erin, any topics or conversations we should be keeping in mind?
Well, I think what popped into my head is not being afraid of staff augmentation, whatever that may look like. And I can give you an example from my own industry. We work with nonprofits, but we're not a nonprofit. And that is that we're not afraid to partner with other agencies that have competencies that enhance or assist ours for the period that we need it. So I think staff augmentation is a really nice sort of supplemental way to navigate unsure waters. So if you're afraid the recession is going to impact you in a specific way coming up, if it happens, when it happens, thinking about that hybrid workforce in creative ways, things like having contractors, things like partnering with other kinds of businesses to augment yours to the extent that you're capable or able to do that. I think that could potentially be in addition to your conversation about strategies coming up.
Definitely. All right, with that, we have reached the end of our panel. I want to give a big thank you to our panelists. I know if we were in an in-person setting, there would be a round of applause. So just know that I'm sending that to you on an emotional level, even if we're not all in the same room. I do also want to give a big thank you to everyone who attended. Again, whether you attended live or you're watching the recording later, thanks for taking time out of your day. Hope you took something from this. Hope it'll help you in the work that you are doing. And I also hope you will join us for more NXUnite panels. As I said, this is our second one of 2023. We have a ton already planned for winter and early spring of 2023. So keep your eye out on the NXUnite website, the NXUnite LinkedIn, or you can find me on LinkedIn. We have panels on donor retention, endowment, tech innovation, gratitude, and more. So there's so many topics, and I hope you'll find one that is relevant to you and your work. If while you are signing up for panels, I'm going to put in a little recommendation to also make a free NXUnite account, because that way when you attend panels, you can start earning what's called cause coins. And when you amass enough of those can be used for some discounts on industry software and some free free consultations with some of our friends in the industry. So if you're going to be joining us for panels, you might as well get that extra benefit. Some examples of those rewards are like an 80% discounted membership to GrantStation or a free data appends consultation with NPO Info. So again, a bonus to attending future panels. All right, done with my plug for that. Mostly, again, a big thank you to the audience and as well to our panelists. I hope everyone has a nice rest of your day. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, Colleen.